The sun hit Dry Creek, Texas like a punishment. It came down in sheets of white heat every July, baking the clay earth into something that cracked like old porcelain and turned the horizon into a trembling mirage. Water troughs ran low. Cattle moved slow. Men squinted at the sky with a particular brand of hopelessness that only a rancher in a drought year truly understood, the kind that settled not just in the throat, but somewhere deeper, somewhere behind the sternum, where faith used to live. Cole Maverick Harding rode into town at 10:30 on a Tuesday, and the street reorganized itself around him the way water moves around a stone. Not from fear, exactly, from recognition. The recognition that some men carry their authority the way others carry a sidearm, openly, without apology, and with the quiet understanding that it will be used if necessary. He was tall in the saddle, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of sun-darkened jaw that came not from vanity, but from 34 years of outdoor living. His hat was black, sweat-stained at the band, tilted at an angle that was entirely practical and somehow still intimidating. He didn't wave at the men who nodded to him from the general store porch. He acknowledged them with the slight dip of his chin that passed, in Cole Harding's vocabulary, for warmth. Black Spur Ranch, 40,000 acres of the most productive grazing land in 3 counties, in this summer. It was dying of thirst. The river that crossed the Calloway property sat directly between Black Spur's western pastures, and the only reliable water source for 60 square miles. Cole had done the arithmetic the way he did everything, methodically, without sentiment. He needed that water access. Gerald Calloway needed money badly enough to negotiate. A marriage contract between Cole and Gerald's eldest daughter, Eliza, would bind the families, transfer the river easement, and solve both men's problems with a single ceremony. It was a practical arrangement. Cole had made peace with that. He had met Eliza Calloway twice. She was striking in the way of women who know they are striking, all surface shimmer and calculated smiles. She had laughed too loudly at his jokes, touched his arm once with deliberate fingers, and looked at the Black Spur D with eyes that didn't bother hiding their interest. Cole had felt nothing in particular. Nothing was fine. Nothing was manageable. A ranch didn't need its owner to feel things. It needed him to make decisions. The wedding was tomorrow. He rode toward the livery, already mentally cataloging the week's work ahead. The eastern fence line needed another crew. Henderson's boy had quit without notice. The new Murdoch Harding. The voice came from a gap between the milliner's shop and the post office, a thin slice of shadow where a young boy of about 9 stood pressing himself against the wall like he hoped it might absorb him. One of the Calloway boys. Cole recognized him by the red hair, the freckles, and the particular expression of a child delivering news he didn't fully understand, but instinctively knew was dangerous. Cole pulled his horse to a stop. "Boy, my papa says," the child swallowed. Started again. "My papa says he needs to speak with you privately, tonight. Not tomorrow morning, tonight." Cole looked at him for a long, steady moment. The boy didn't flinch, which Cole respected. "Tell your papa I'll be there by 7. The Calloway ranch house smelled of old wood, burnt coffee, and the particular anxiety of a man unraveling at the seams. Gerald Calloway met Cole at the door with a handshake that was slightly too firm and eyes that couldn't settle on any one place. He was a man who had once been robust, broad-chested, loud-laughing, the kind of rancher who slapped backs at cattle auctions, but dead had worked on him, the way water works on limestone, slowly, persistently, until what remained was full of holes. "Cole, good of you to come. Sit down. Let me get you something." "I don't need anything, Gerald." Cole sat because it was easier than standing while a nervous man hovered. "What's happened?" It wasn't a question. Gerald heard that and seemed to age slightly in real time. He told the story in pieces, the way a man confesses, reluctantly, in the wrong order, with long pauses where shame filled the silence. Eliza was gone, had been gone since before dawn. Her window was open, her good traveling bag missing, and on her pillow, as though she had placed it there with theatrical precision, was a folded note written in her sharp, lipping hand. Gerald set the letter on the table between them like a man laying down a dead thing. Cole read it once, then set it down without expression. "I won't be traded like livestock. I have chosen a life that is actually mine. Don't look for me. E. The gambler's name wasn't in the letter, but Gerald filled it in with a kind of exhausted bitterness. Remy Dussault, a Frenchman from New Orleans who had come through Dry Creek 3 months ago dealing cards and dealing charm in equal measure, and Eliza, beautiful restless bored Eliza, had apparently been corresponding with him in secret since February. Cole sat with the information for a moment. "The contract," he said. "The contract," Gerald's voice fractured. "The contract still stands, Cole. The water rights, the easement, everything, I swear to you, I intend to honor. The contract was conditional on the marriage, Gerald. There is no marriage. There can be." The older man leaned forward, and something terrible lived in his expression. The desperation of a father, yes, but also the desperation of a man who has run out of every other move. "I have another daughter." The room went very quiet. Rose Calloway was in the kitchen when she heard her father's voice drop to that particular low register, the one he used when something was wrong and he was trying to make it sound like something else. She had been awake since before the sun. She had known something was wrong since before the sun. When you grew up in a house where peace was always temporary and silence always meant wait for it, you developed a sensitivity to the atmosphere that bordered on animal instinct. She knew Eliza was gone before she checked the room. She knew from the way the house breathed differently in the morning, lighter, somehow, and colder, the way a barn feels after a horse has been stolen. Rose sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She was 22 years old. She had hair the color of dark honey and eyes that were an unusual shade. Not quite brown, not quite gold, the color of creek water in late afternoon. She was not the sort of woman who was described in terms of beauty because she spent too much time looking at everything else. It was simply something that existed about her the way good land is quality, quietly without ceremony, evident only to those paying attention. She listened to the murmur of her father's voice through the wall. She heard a second voice, lower, steadier, and understood there was a man in the house. She thought about her brothers. Thomas was 9. Will was 6. Last winter, Will had worn boots the sizes too small for months before Rose had noticed and traded her grandmother as silver brooch at the mercantile without telling anyone. She thought about the way Thomas had started sleeping with one eye open, the way small boys do when they sense the structure of their world is unreliable. She thought about all of this very carefully and quietly while her coffee went cold. Then her father appeared in the kitchen doorway. His face was a map of everything he didn't know how to say, and Rose looked at him and felt something in her chest go very still. The way air goes still before weather arrives. "Papa," she said, softly, not a question. He sat down across from her. His hands, she noticed, were shaking. He told her all of it. His voice broke once. She didn't look away from his face, not once, because she understood that this was the kind of moment that required witness, and she had always been the one in this family who could bear to see things clearly. When he finished, the kitchen was silent except for the tick of the iron stove. Rose set down her cold coffee. She looked at the table for a long moment. Then she looked back at her father, at this hollowed-out man who had never once in 22 years thought to ask what she wanted, and she said the words that would change everything in the same calm, quiet voice she used for broken things she had already decided to fix. "Tell me about him." The chapel at the edge of Dry Creek had been built by settlers who believed in permanence. Its walls were thick limestone hauled from the riverbed, its floor worn smooth by 20 years of boots and prayers, and the particular grief of frontier funerals. Morning light entered through to narrow windows on the eastern wall and fell across the wooden pews in long pale bars. The kind of light that made everything look confessional, like truth was simply a matter of standing in the right place and waiting. Cole Harding stood at the altar at 11:58 and felt nothing he could name. He was dressed well, black coat, clean shirt, the silver belt buckle his father had left him, and he stood with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes on the chapel door, with the particular stillness of a man who has made a decision and moved past second-guessing it. Around him, the pews held perhaps 40 witnesses. Ranchers, tradespeople, 2 lawyers, the county clerk, people who had come to observe the sealing of an agreement. that everyone in 3 counties understood had less to do with romance than with water tables and land deeds. Nobody expected tenderness. This was Dry Creek. Tenderness was for back east, for novels, for women with too much idle time. The preacher, a lean man named Aldous Birch with wire spectacles and the resigned expression of someone who had conducted too many of these pragmatic frontier unions, opened his Bible and waited. The organ began. Cole watched the door. She appeared in the threshold the way a figure appears in a dream, present suddenly, without the ordinary mechanics of arrival, as though she had simply materialized in the space where the outside world met the inside one. The wedding dress was ivory, high-necked, fitted through the bodice with small pearl buttons that caught the window light as she moved. The veil was thick French lace, the kind that obscured rather than softened, falling from a small crown of dried wildflowers all the way to her collarbone. He could see nothing of her face. She walked slowly, not with the unhurried confidence of a bride at peace, but with the deliberate control of a person managing something, fear, Cole thought, or something adjacent to it. Her hands gripped a small bouquet of white prairie flowers, and even from the altar he could see that her knuckles were pale. Her shoulders were set with a rigidity that looked less like composure and more like someone holding a door closed against a wind that very much wanted in. Cole frowned, almost imperceptibly. Almost. He had met Eliza Calloway twice. The first time she had entered a room like she expected applause and received it. The second time she had extended her hand with the particular laziness of a woman who understands her own value in a transaction and feels no need to perform effort. He remembered the way she moved, loose-hipped, proprietary, comfortable in her own theater. This woman moved nothing like that. She arrived at his side, and Cole turned fully to face her. And the frown that had been almost imperceptible became something he had to consciously dismantle before it showed on his face. Her hands were wrong, smaller than he remembered. Her height was wrong, 2 inches shorter at minimum. And beneath the veil, where he should have been able to detect at least the impression of features he'd seen before, there was only the shadowed suggestion of a face entirely unfamiliar. Preacher Birch cleared his throat and began. Cole did not hear the words. He was engaged in the kind of rapid, cold calculation that had made him a successful rancher and a difficult man to negotiate against, cataloging discrepancies, assigning probabilities, arriving at a conclusion that landed in his chest like a stone dropped into still water. He stood through the opening liturgy with his jaw set and his eyes fixed on the veil, and he said nothing, and he did not move because 40 people were watching, and he was not a man who performed his crises publicly. He waited. He waited until Preacher Birch reached the words, "if any here present." And then Cole did something that would be discussed in Dry Creek for the following 11 years. He turned to face her fully. His right hand moved with the quiet precision of a man who knows exactly what he's doing, and his fingers closed around her wrist, not cruelly, not roughly, but with an immovable, iron certainty. She startled beneath his grip, just once, a small flinch that she suppressed almost immediately. And he felt her pulse beneath his thumb, and it was going absolutely wild. The chapel went silent. Not gradually, immediately, the way sound disappears when a rifle discharges. 40 people stopped breathing at precisely the same moment. Cole's voice was low, controlled, stripped of everything except the flat, precise edge of a man who does not say things he doesn't mean. "You're not the woman I agreed to marry." The words were quiet enough that the back pews didn't catch them. The front rows did, and he could feel the ripple of comprehension move through the space like a tremor. She didn't crumple. She didn't gasp. She went very, very still beneath his grip, the way a wild thing goes still when it understands that movement is the only thing that will make this worse. And he felt her exhale once slowly, with the disciplined lungs of someone who has been bracing for this particular impact since before sunrise. Cole straightened and turned to the congregation, and his voice climbed back to its normal register, carrying the authority of a man who owns 40,000 acres and has never once lost control of a room. "Give us a moment." It was not a request. The witnesses understood this. Preacher Birch stepped back. People found reasons to examine their hands, their boots, the grain of the wooden pews. Cole released her wrist, moved to the narrow vestibule door at the side of the altar, and held it open. She walked through it ahead of him, still straight-spined, still silent. He closed the door behind them. The vestibule was small, a room barely larger than a generous closet used for storing hymnals and extra candles. Two wooden chairs faced each other beneath a single window that looked out on the cemetery. The light in here was different from the chapel, flatter, more honest, without the theater of those long morning rays. There was nowhere to perform in a room this size, nowhere to be anything except exactly what you were. Cole stood between her and the door, not blocking it, not threatening, simply present in the way of a man who intends this conversation to conclude before it opens. "Remove the veil," he said. She faced him. He could see the slight working of her throat above the lace neckline. One swallow. Composing herself, and then her hands rose to the small crown of dried wildflowers and lifted the veil back from her face. Cole Maverick Harding had ridden into a stampede once, at 19 years old. He remembered with perfect clarity the way time had behaved strangely in that moment, not slower. Exactly, but denser, each second containing more information than a second should reasonably hold. The smell of churned earth, the thunder of hooves in his sternum, the peculiar crystalline quality of thinking with absolute clarity. While the world came apart around him, he felt something remarkably like that now. There was no architecture of language he reached for that felt adequate. So his mind simply stopped reaching and arrived at the fact directly. She was extraordinary. Not in the way that Eliza had been, which was the beauty of a polished surface. This was bone deep, unperformed, with the specific quality of something that existed independent of observation. The way certain landscapes are beautiful whether or not anyone is standing in them. Her eyes, that unusual amber creek water color, held three things simultaneously that he had never seen coexist in a single human expression: dignity, exhaustion, and a courage so quiet it was almost indistinguishable from peace. She looked at him directly, without apology, without theater, and then she told him everything. She told it the way she had apparently decided in advance to tell it, with economy, without embellishment, without a single bid for sympathy. Eliza, the gambler, her father's collapsed finances, the two small brothers asleep in a house that would belong to a creditor before winter if this contract dissolved. She laid each fact down in front of him with the steady hands of a woman who has already surrendered the outcome and is simply ensuring the record is accurate before the verdict arrives. When she finished, the room held the silence of something that has just been made irreversible. Cole looked at her for a long moment. The cemetery window behind her framed the afternoon light around her shoulders. He was aware of his own pulse in a way he couldn't remember being in recent years, aware of it and faintly irritated by the awareness, the way a practical man is irritated by anything he cannot immediately classify or control. The logical course of action was clear. Void the proceeding. Let his lawyers address the contract. Walk out of this vestibule a free man and find another route to the water rights. That didn't involve a woman who had arrived at his altar under a borrowed name and a borrowed veil. He knew this. He looked at her eyes, and he knew that she knew this too, and that she was standing in front of him. Anyway, with her chin at that particular angle. Not defiant, not pleading, just steady, and something in the architecture of that steadiness reached him in a place that practical reasoning had never needed to address before. "Put the veil back on," Cole said. His voice was quieter now, rougher at the edge, like wood that has been planed too close to the grain. She blinked once. "Let's finish the ceremony." Blackspur Ranch was the most beautiful place Rose Calloway had ever seen, and it felt nothing like home. The main house sat on a rise of land that looked westward across 40,000 acres of rolling grass and red rock bluffs, and in the early morning, when the light came in low and amber from the east, the whole of it glowed like the inside of a lantern. The barns were enormous and well-kept. The fences ran straight and true to the horizon. Every post, every hinge, every water trough spoke of a man who believed that order was a form of respect for the land, for the animals, and perhaps most of all for himself. Rose moved through it quietly for the first 3 days, learning the geography of her new life the way you learn a foreign language, carefully, without assumption, paying attention to what each thing was actually saying rather than what she expected it to mean. Cole was courteous, unfailingly, immovably courteous, in the way of a man who has decided on a behavior and intends to execute it with the same precision. He applies to everything else. He said good morning. He passed the salt. He asked, once, whether her room was comfortable, and when she said it was, he nodded and returned to his ledger as though the exchange had been satisfactorily completed, and filed. He did not look at her the way he had looked at her in the vestibule, or rather, he was very deliberate about not doing so, which Rose, who paid attention to things, found more telling than if he simply had. She did not push. She did not perform. She simply lived, which was, as it turned out, the most disruptive thing she could possibly have done in a house that had been running on efficiency and emotional distance for what felt like a very long time. On the fourth morning, she found one of the ranch hands, a weathered older man named Grady, standing outside the foaling barn with an expression of helpless distress. Inside, a mare was laboring badly with a foal that had turned wrong. The rancher's regular hand who managed such things was 3 days' ride away at a cattle auction. Grady was good with cattle and useless with horses and knew it. Rose handed him her coffee, went inside, and spent the next 2 hours doing what needed doing with quiet competence and steady hands. When the foal finally stood on its trembling new legs and the mare turned to nose it with enormous exhausted tenderness, Grady stood in the barn doorway with his hat in his hands and something reverent in his old face. She asked him not to mention it. He mentioned it to everyone on the property before supper. Cole heard about it in his study from his foreman, a compact and direct man named Hatch, who delivered the information with the neutral tone of a man who has opinions and is professionally suppressing them. Cole listened, said nothing, returned to his ledger, sat with his pen unmoving above the page for considerably longer than the ledger required. The following evening, he came to supper, and there were wildflowers in a tin cup in the center of the table. Small yellow ones, the kind that grew along the eastern fence line. He looked at them, looked at Rose, who was serving without ceremony and apparently deeply interested in the biscuits. He sat down and said nothing, and the flowers remained on the table. And something in the atmosphere of Black Spur shifted. The way pressure shifts before a weather change, subtle enough, that only someone paying very close attention would have caught it. Rose caught it. She said nothing either, and bent her attention back to the biscuits, and felt something cautiously warm move through her chest, and tried very hard not to trust it. Eliza arrived on a Wednesday. Rose saw her from the kitchen window first, a figure on horseback coming up the main road, with the particular bearing of someone who has rehearsed their entrance. Even travel-worn, even with the dust of hard riding on her clothes and something diminished in the set of her shoulders, Eliza Calloway was a remarkable-looking woman. She had the kind of beauty that announced itself, that arrived in a room ahead of its owner. And Rose stood at the kitchen window and felt, for the first time since the wedding, genuinely cold. Cole was in the yard when Eliza dismounted. Rose could not hear the conversation. She watched it instead, the way you watch weather from behind glass, aware of its power, grateful for the barrier, uncertain how long the barrier will hold. Eliza spoke with animation. Her hands moved. At one point she touched Cole's arm, the same deliberate gesture Rose had heard described, and Cole looked down at the hand on his arm with an expression that Rose even from a distance could read clearly. He felt nothing. He removed her hand with 2 fingers, and a courtesy so complete it was its own kind of coldness. He said something brief. Eliza's posture changed, the animation draining out of it, replaced by something stiffer, more brittle. She looked toward the house then, and her eyes found the kitchen window, and for a single suspended moment the 2 sisters looked at each other across the yard and across everything that lay between them. Rose did not move from the window. She held her sister's gaze with the same steadiness she had offered Cole in the vestibule. Not with anger, not with triumph, simply with the clear, unblinking honesty of a woman who is done apologizing for existing. Eliza looked away first. She was gone before supper. Cole came inside and sat at the table, and Rose set food in front of him, and neither of them spoke about it, and the not speaking had a different quality than it had in those first cold days. It was the silence of 2 people who understand each other well enough that some things do require words, and the recognition of that shift moved through Rose with a warmth so sudden it almost frightened her. The letter arrived 4 days later. Rose knew something was wrong by the way Hatch handed it to Cole. Not the normal delivery of correspondence, but the careful transfer of something the messenger wishes he wasn't carrying. Cole read it at the table standing, and his face did what it always did when he was absorbing difficult information. It went very still, and very neutral in the way of deep water that gives nothing away about how far down it goes. He folded the letter, set it on the table with one flat hand. "Your father," he said, "forged a portion of the water rights documentation." Rose sat down slowly. Cole explained it with precision, without cruelty. The county clerk had found the discrepancy during a routine survey filing. The contract, the document upon which the entire arrangement had been constructed, had a section that Gerald Calloway had altered to make the river easement appear more comprehensive than it legally was. Cole's lawyer had reviewed it that morning. The verdict was unambiguous. "The marriage contract," Cole said, "is void." The kitchen held the words. Rose looked at the table. She thought about the foal on its trembling legs. She thought about the wildflowers in the tin cup. She thought about Cole's face in that vestibule, the roughness that had entered his voice when he told her to put the veil back on. And she understood with perfect, devastating clarity that none of it, changed the arithmetic of a forged document and a voided contract. She stood up, reached behind herself, and began to untie her apron with steady hands that she was enormously, privately proud of. "I'll be packed by morning," she said. "Rose," she stopped, not because the word commanded her. He hadn't used it that way, but because of the quality of it. Cole Harding said her name the way a man says something he has been holding in his mouth for a long time and has finally decided the holding is more costly than the saying. She turned. He was standing across the kitchen, and he looked, for the first time since she had known him, uncertain. Not weak, not diminished. Simply honest in the way that only a truly strong man can afford to be, because he has nothing left to prove and therefore nothing left to hide behind. He reached into his coat and set a document on the table between them. She looked at it, then at him. "The contract is void," he said again, quieter now. Each word placed with the care of a man who has measured them individually. "Which means I'm not bound by water rights or easements, or anything your father signed or didn't sign." He paused. Something moved behind his eyes, something she recognized because she had been quietly watching his eyes for weeks. "I am bound by nothing except the fact that I cannot think with any clarity when you are not in this house, and I have tried, and the trying has not improved the situation." Rose looked at the document. Her name was on it. Her name, and Cole's name, and the words "equal partnership" in the clean black ink of a man who means what he writes. Half of Black Spur Ranch. She picked it up, read it carefully, because she was Rose Calloway and she read things carefully, and she was not going to be undone by sentiment when there was language to examine. Then she set it down, and she looked up at this hard, quiet, complicated man who had grabbed her wrist at an altar and somehow, in the weeks since, managed to work his way into every corner of her carefully defended heart. She narrowed her eyes very slightly. "You're a hard man, Cole Harding," she said. "If I stay, you don't get a housekeeper. You don't get a ranch hand. You get a partner. Equal say. Equal ground. You agree to that?" The silence lasted exactly long enough to mean something. Then Cole Harding, a man whom 40 witnesses had never once seen smile, almost did. "Deal," he said. And this time when he extended his hand, Rose took it and held it and did not let go. And outside, across 40,000 acres of red rock and grassland, the river ran on, indifferent and eternal, as though it had always known it would end up belonging to both of them.